We are thrilled to have with us this morning Brother John Scott, a minister of the Christian Care Center, a longtime minister of the Saturn Road congregation, but we appreciate him so much and the work that he is doing now with the Christian Care Center, and he has agreed to come and to bring us our lesson this morning, so please give him your kind attention.
Thank you, Russell. Good morning, one and all. Honored to be with you this morning here at the Great West Hill congregation. My wife, Teresa, is with me this morning. We've been here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area ever since 1975, and perhaps have brushed into many of you in years past in various contexts, and honored to be asked. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Well, I want to add another color this morning to this God's rainbow of love. Red and yellow, black and white. And I want to add the color gray this morning. Christian Care Center, did that connect with anybody when Russell introduced me? We look after about 2,000 seniors at Christian Care Centers on our multiple campuses here in North Texas. About 80 of us went to the Texas Rangers game a couple of weeks ago against the Athletics in an afternoon game. Thankfully, we were in a shaded pavilion area. Lots of wheelchairs and walkers, and there were 80 of us there. And I happened to sit behind Clint and Mary Humphreys. And Clint is in our healthcare center, and Mary is in our assisted living facility. We serve about 2,000 seniors across our communities and in home health and hospice. And there they sat cheering the Texas Rangers on to victory that afternoon. And I was noticing them as they were holding hands. And I happened to ask Clint, Clint, how long have you and Mary been married? And with kind of a scratchy voice, he said, December 26th, 1940. And I began to do the math on that. Been married 72, nearly 73 years. And the next day, I happened to see a little story on the internet about a couple. The headline said, married 72 years, die holding hands. And it was a couple from Iowa named Norman and Gordon Yeager who were in a car accident. They're in the ICU together, and the doctors allowed them to clasp their hands in the ICU. And Gordon passed away at about 3:38 in the afternoon. The son, Dennis, said, Dad's heart monitor was still beeping. Dad's heart monitor was still beeping. The nurse looked and saw the couple's hands were still clasped. Her heart, Dennis is talking about his mom's heart, was beating through him. She died an hour later. And I thought, that's us. Christ's heart beats through us. Christ's ministry is accomplished through our hands. Christ's word is on our lips. We want to die holding hands. We want to finish strong. Well, I invite your attention this morning, if you happen to have your Old Testament with you, to Genesis chapter 17. That's where I'm heading in just a moment. This old couple had began to prudently plan their retirement years. They had had their life insurance and their wills updated. Their home mortgage was paid off. They'd fixed up their home to make it more senior friendly. They were looking after their health and diet meticulously. They'd been married for decades. In fact, they'd been married for so many years they couldn't even remember not being married. Yes, preparing for retirement. Nice, sweet, restful, peaceful retirement. And then it all busted loose. I'm in Genesis chapter 17. Now when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I am God Almighty, walk before me, be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him. As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but you shall be called Abraham. For I'll make you the father of a multitude of nations, and I'll make you exceedingly fruitful, and I'll make nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant and to be God to you and to your descendants forever. And then drifting down, I'm in chapter 17, verse 15. Then God said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be your name. And I will bless her, and indeed I'll give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples shall come for her. Verse 17 of Genesis chapter 17. Then Abraham fell on his face and did what? What did he do? Laughed. And said in his heart, Will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might come before you. Abraham and Sarah, they're 99 and 90 years old. They laugh. They both laugh. They're incredulous. They promise boy who will be named Isaac, and that word itself means laughter. They thought their retirement years were all mapped out, and now it's going to be diapers at 100 and college tuition at 120. Someone said, if you want to hear God laugh, then you just go ahead and tell them about all your plans for the future. Are you old enough now to discover the truth of that? If you want to hear God laugh, you start announcing to the Lord above about all your plans for the future. God had saved the best for last. Abraham, my friend, Abraham, old buddy, old pal, you thought your retirement years were going to be about lap robes and rocking chairs and watching Wheel of Fortune. But now when you rock, there's going to be a little boy on your lap. I've saved the best for last. Robert Browning put these words into the mouth of Rabbi Ben Ezra. Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. The last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his hands. Abraham learned that the best was indeed going to come last. And to live confidently, trust God, be not afraid. Now, you Bible scholars know the backstory. You know what had occurred in Genesis chapter 16, the previous chapter. Abraham and Sarah had made a mistake. I mean, a big mistake. In fact, the mistake has a name, Ishmael. And for time's sake, I won't rehearse the story, but here's this mother, this Egyptian handmaiden mother, Hagar, and her little boy, Ishmael. Abraham and Sarah had taken a detour from the plan of God, trying to take the matters into their own hand. And here they are in the wilderness of Beersheba, but God provides for this single mom. My heart's always been touched about what happens from the lives of single moms, having been raised by a single mom. God provides for Hagar in the wilderness of Beersheba. He provides the well of water for she and for Ishmael. And God doesn't disqualify this old couple, Abraham and Sarah, because of the mistake they had made 13 years earlier. God doesn't bench them. Oh no. In fact, God not only forgives their Ishmael, He blesses their Ishmael. In Genesis 17, verse 17 through 20, God says He will bless Ishmael, that he shall be fruitful and the father of 12 princes, that he himself would become the progenitor of a great nation. Here's something I've learned about our seniors, our older people. You know, there's not one of us that don't have some Ishmaels, some regrets, some heartaches and woes. We've experienced the death and divorce and debt and failures and prejudice and pettiness and sins, the laundry list of losses, but through it all, our seniors have learned grace and compassion and wisdom that younger people just simply couldn't have. And now, ready to be used by God as wise mentors and counselors to those younger who travel the same roads behind them. Why do we segregate old for young like we do? Even in church. it begins in the parking lot. 5-year-olds this way, and 15-year-olds are over here, and 25-year-olds are here, and the 55-year-olds are back here somewhere, and the 75-year-olds, well, they're out here in the auditorium somewhere, I guess. I grew up in Middle Tennessee in the 50s and 60s, and I saw racism both very subtle and very, very overt. And now I'm beginning to see another type of ism everywhere. Ageism. Ageism. Rabbi Abraham J. Herschel said, "A test of a people is how it behaves toward the old." It's easy to love children. Even tyrants and dictators make a point of being fond of children. But the affection and care of the old, the incurable, the helpless, are the true gold mines of a culture. Well, this morning, just briefly, I promise, I'm not going to scare you when I tell you this, but I promise to hustle. I'm going to tell you 7 lessons, and that's what's going to scare you, but 7 lessons that I've learned in the last several years of working with Christian Care Center from the greatest generation. 7 lessons from the greatest generation. You know what the greatest generation is, right? I think it was Tom Brokaw. In fact, I know it was Tom Brokaw, that iconic NBC news anchor that kind of gave a name to this World War II generation in his great book, called The Greatest Generation. And these are the folks that, grew up during the Great Depression and lived during the World War II years, came home, they built our churches, they built our communities. Mr. Brokaw begins his book, The Greatest Generation, by telling a story about Gordon Larson, a young man in his community in South Dakota, a small town where Tom Brokaw's mom was the postmistress, I guess, in this little town. And this young man, this was back in the 1950s, he comes into the post office one morning and he's growling and complaining about the teenagers the night before in this little small South Dakota town. They were up to some shenanigans and no good. It was Halloween night. And there were some hijinks and shenanigans, and Gordon Larson was fussing about it to the postmistress, Tom Brokaw's mother. And she says to him, "Oh, Gordon, what were you doing when you were 17 years old?" And he looks her squarely in the eye, and he says, "When I was 17, I was landing on Guadalcanal." And he turned on his heel and walked out of the post office. I remember doing a funeral a couple of years ago. One of the elders at the Saturn Road Church of Christ in Garland, Brother Carroll, I knew that he had been a World War II veteran. I'd seen his Purple Heart, in fact, and seen the burns on his body. But his sons were speaking at his funeral, and they were telling about their dad, Brother Carroll, when he was 17 years old. Somehow he had connived his way into the Marines, and his very first night in combat on Okinawa, their foxholes had been stormed by waves of kamikaze Japanese, and Brother Carroll had fought in his foxhole hand to hand and had killed a Japanese colonel there in his foxhole. And this son is telling this at his funeral, and had sat on the body all night long anticipating further waves of invasion. This generation, the greatest generation of which I speak, they matured early because of life circumstances and the history of our world. Okay, you ready? Lesson number 1. I'm going to give you 7 lessons briefly from the greatest generation. Lesson number 1, take personal responsibility for your life. This generation is not a generation of whiners or excuse makers. They take pride in self-sufficiency and personal responsibility. This age group doesn't reach out for doles or handouts or charity. Ephesians chapter 6, the Apostle Paul reminds us, stand firm, therefore. Stand firm. Why? Because we're in a spiritual battle every single day of our lives. Put on the full armor, the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand firm. And then he delineates this armor that we are to wear. Why? Because we're in a spiritual battle every day. Teresa and I, my wife is here with me. Teresa is Senior Vice President at Christian Care Center. Yeah, she's my boss. She really is. In every sense of that word, Teresa is Senior Vice President at Christian Care Center. And we had gone to Israel back in 2008, and our guide was talking to us about Armageddon. I've heard of Armageddon through the years, of course, in Scripture, Revelation 16:16. And I guess I've just embraced that popular notion of there being one final cataclysmic battle, good versus evil, on the plains of Armageddon. And Armageddon means hills of Megiddo. And Megiddo is an ancient Old Testament battleground. And I think he said 27 different major battles in the Old Testament fought in Megiddo. But he was talking about this battle of Armageddon. And our guide made an interesting observation. See if you buy this. I had to think about it, but I think I believe it. He said instead of thinking about Armageddon as being one final cataclysmic battle, good versus evil, think about it as every single day in the heart. Every single day we do fight our own spiritual battles that rage in our heart and minds and lives, don't we? Lesson number 2, be frugal. This generation is the one that they built their homes in the suburbs, they bought Chevys, they maintained them, they shunned easy credit. This generation learned to live on less and just were grateful for what they have. I hear stories at Christian Care Center about people talking about Christmas when they were a kid. And man, if they just got an orange in the toe of the stocking, they were happy as long as their family were around them. Again, Tom Brokaw was talking about his own dad. His nickname was Red Brokaw. And he said his dad was the blue ribbon member of the fix-it generation. All his mom had to do was just make a comment about how she needed something, and he'd disappear into the workshop and come back with it. And Tom Brokaw says when he was a boy that everybody else were getting some gasoline-powered mowers. You do remember the old push mowers, right? And that's what people had to use were the push mowers, where there were some newfangled gasoline-powered mowers. And he thought he'd get one, and he'd start earning some money when he was a boy, mowing lawns. And he tells his dad he wants a gas mower. And he says, but his dad disappears into their workshop and built a mower using an old washing machine motor, welded pipes for handles, a hand-tooled blade, discarded toy wagon wheels mounted on a plywood platform. He painted it all black, and it was a formidable machine. At first, I was embarrassed, but then it drew admirers, and I was proud of its homespun place in a store-bought world. Lesson number 3, be humble. Be humble. Typical of this generation is their sons or their daughters or their grandchildren when their dad has passed away. And you do know I've seen estimates between 1,100 and even 1,800 World War II veterans pass away daily here in the United States. I'm sure you've heard that. But typical is they go up in the attic and they're rummaging around for papers and such. And you know what they find? The loved ones find a medal. They'll find a World War II combat medal of some sort, or some other recognition. And they'll say, man, Dad never spoke about that. And typical of this generation is they don't talk too much about exploits of World War II. Partly because just remembering the HELL of it all and the carnage of it all, they don't want to have to think about it. And the other part of it, many of them would say, oh, we were just doing our duty. They trudged across northern Africa and Europe, fighting their way toward Berlin. They hunkered down in countless foxholes across the South Pacific as they were moving inexorably toward Tokyo. Wives and moms stayed home and watched the mailbox. Or that old olive green government car comes lumbering down the street and their hearts stop, wondering what type of news is going to be received. They worked in factories and shipyards, churning out the vital war materials. Yet, as these quiet heroes, as you pry their stories from them, there's no chest pounding, there's no bravado. They were simply trying to rid their world of monsters and to make their country safer for generations to come. Lesson number 4. The greatest generation loved loyally. Loved loyally. Marriage to this generation was commitment. And my wife and I see it every day at Christian Care Centers. Despite declining health, despite fuzzy memories, just the ebb and flow of the tides of life. Marriage is commitment. Not about conveniences, about covenant, about commitment. They knew nothing of prenuptial agreements. They stayed true blue to their covenants. Love was about covenant, commitment, not about conveniences. This generation loved loyally. Lesson number 5. Lessons from the greatest generation. Work hard. Work hard. In war, these men had learned to focus on the objective at hand and not to give up on that objective until mission was accomplished. They come back home to the States after World War II. They carry that same focus into the world of work. They didn't fall into this fallacy that you have to find your passion at your workplace in order to be happy. They were working for loftier motivations. They grew up in the Depression. They were trying to provide more financial security to their family than they had had growing up. They were knights in shining armor, in blue serge suits, or in blue-collared shirts. I know our younger generation, wants it all right now. Teresa and I have 2 children. Our son, Shane, is 35, and he's married and got 3 kids, and he teaches at Dallas Christian School. He's a coach and a Bible teacher at Dallas Christian. He and Mandy have more right now than Teresa and I do, probably. They want it all. You know how they've got it, though. Credit. Same with our daughter. Our daughter, Lindsay, is married to Mark Simmons. He's a youth minister at the Burleson Church of Christ. And they've got 2 kids, but they want it all right now. This generation of which I speak shunned easy credit. They earned what they got by the sweat of their brow. Lesson number 6. Don't make life so complicated. Don't make life so complicated. Men and women of this generation didn't obsess about finding themselves or finding the holy grail of a guy or a gal that exists only in some fantasy. Man, they met the gal in the town square and married them and lived happily ever after. They didn't diet. They didn't join health clubs. They didn't go to spas. They worked hard. They played hard. This is the generation that has a bedrock faith in God above. This generation loves the church. Oh, by the way, you do know the fastest growing religious group in America is not the Muslims, it's not the Mormons. According to the Pew Research Council, the fastest growing religious group in America are the nuns. Not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. You know what that means? People say, yeah, I love God. I'm a spiritual-minded person. But people that have none when it comes to church affiliations. This generation of which I speak is not interested in trends or polls or shortcuts or market research to dictate to them about their faith. User-friendly, seeker-sensitive, that just sounds like babble to them. Madison Avenue advertisers, Hollywood celebrities, Washington, D.C. politicians, they don't define for this generation right or wrong or good or bad. It doesn't shape their belief. This generation still believes in absolutes. That when God's Word speaks it, it's the truth. This generation of which I speak, it doesn't care a hoot about what the Supreme Court is going to say in defining what marriage is. They already know what marriage is. They don't need it to be defined by someone else. They're not particularly interested in being a high-tech. Learning all the worship trends from ACU or Pepperdine does not particularly interest them. What is this generation interested in? All they know is they love the Lord and they love His church, and they're still brand name loyal to it. They worship, they serve, they give. This is a generation that will still visit visitors. This is a generation that the ladies will still come to the bridal showers and baby showers of people at their church that they don't even know, simply because they're still loyal to their church. They storm the beaches of Normandy with casseroles when there is illness within their church family. To this generation, the expression of faith and how best to live life is not so complicated. Lesson number 7. The greatest generation, here's something I've learned within the last couple of years. The greatest generation still yearns to be of value and to be needed and to see purpose within their lives. I learned this out at our Fort Worth campus on a fall day on a Thursday on a fall day. I'd gotten confused about the scheduling, and I thought that I was doing a devotional at 1:30 in assisted living, and all of our residents had gone to the Texas State Fair. That's how I remember it was fall. And there was just me and one little lady, a 97-year-old lady named Geneva, and she was there, and I was there, and I had 30 minutes with Geneva. And I was just asking Geneva about her life, 97 years old. She had, her first husband had been a prisoner of war for 3.5 years during World War II, and he had died. She'd married again, and he had passed away. She said the hardest thing in her life is that she'd buried a grown son when he was in his 40s. And just learning about Geneva and learning about her life. And you know how us preachers are. We're always anxious to move on and get to our next gig and such. And it was nearly 2 o'clock, and that's when I go downstairs to do the devotional for the independent living people. And I had to get away from Geneva. And Geneva, anything I can pray for you as I'm leaving and as I'm pulling away and ready to take off? And she thinks for a moment, and she stopped me in her tracks when she said this: Brother Scott, pray that I'll still have a purpose in my life. That's right. Our older people, they still want purpose and passion. They still want meaning and value within their lives. Where do you find the word retirement? Does somebody want to look that up and tell me? At Christmas time, we are inundated, Russell, with youth groups coming from every which direction to bring our old people candy canes and to sing Christmas carols. And that's great and wonderful. You nearly have to make an appointment walking on youth groups at Christmas at Christian Care Center. Of course, what I'm always thinking is, yeah, but where are you in July? Come on now. But here's the truth I've really learned. It's our older people. They want to be the ones who are out passing out candy canes and singing Christmas carols for someone. This older generation still wants purpose and value and meaning. You remember the Boston Marathon bombing, of course, the finale of the race, and you saw this countless times replayed on television. Remember the little man that was getting ready to cross the finish line? And the first bomb goes off, and he wobbles, and he buckles, and he falls to the knees, and all the rescue workers come zooming in. You remember that? Remember seeing that on television, that clip? That's Bill Ifring. And Bill is 78 years old. Bill was finishing his 3rd marathon. But what you didn't see is Bill got to his feet, crossed the finish line, and then kept running. He didn't know what was fixing to happen. And 78-year-old Bill Ifring kept running. You know about Joe the barber up in Hartford, Connecticut? Joe is 82 years old, and once a week he goes out to a public park in Hartford, Connecticut, and somehow hooks up his clippers to his car battery and cuts the hair of the homeless in Hartford, and been doing that for 25 years. Joe still wants a purpose. Oh, did you see 2 weeks ago about the 80-year-old Japanese gentleman that summited Mount Everest? Summited Mount Everest. Abraham and Sarah hit their stride in their sunset years. And that's what seniors 3,000 years later want too. Our seniors want Isaacs to raise. Our seniors want to be a blessing to the generations to come. I want to challenge us as the church, the Lord Jesus Christ. It seems fitting on this week as we prepare to celebrate July 4th holiday, I want to challenge us to remember and to salute our elders who resisted the evils of that day to the point of bloodshed, to remember those who didn't run or shirk or hide when hard times visited our nation or personal life, to remember those who built our churches, who built our communities, who built the infrastructure of all that we are, to remember those who planted the trees whose fruit we now eat, whose shade we now enjoy. I'll conclude with this little story, and then I'll offer the invitation this morning. Anybody in here alive in 1968, by any chance? Anybody nearly as old as I am? Yeah, of course. 1968. Mexico Summer Olympics. That summer of 68 were memorable for a number of reasons. Nearly everyone remembers the racial tension in our nation at that time, and the two gentlemen who won the 200, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, and the Black Power salute. Oh, you remember Bob Beamon? What was it, 29 feet plus, the broad jump record? But there was something else that happened in the 68 Summer Olympics that to me make it very memorable. It was the marathon. The last runner in the marathon at the 1968 Summer Olympics was a runner from Tanzania named John Stephen Ajare. And long after the Mexico City Stadium had emptied out, the cameras were gone, the press was gone, in limps, hobbles, John Stephen Ajare from Tanzania. He'd somehow gotten injured on the course, that 26.2-mile course. And someone asked him as he hobbles into the finish line, someone asked him, why bother? Why didn't he quit? He finished hours behind the others. And he said, my country didn't send me 7,000 miles to start the race. They sent me 7,000 miles to finish. Isn't that right? We, as God's people, we want to finish our race strong. Teresa and I were in Rome. We were visiting. We did all the things that you do when you go to Rome. Visited the Colosseum and the Vatican, Sistine Chapel, the typical the things that tourists see in Rome. But we went to the Maritime prison where allegedly the Apostle Paul and even was incarcerated, and they take you down into the Maritime prison and they say, this is the place, right here, this is the cell where the Apostle Paul was incarcerated and from where he wrote his prison epistles. And I'm thinking, really? You could know that? But now they've cut some steps down into the prison cell. It used to be they just kind of dropped you down head first like through a manhole cover kind of thing. But the guide said, but if you're big or if you're claustrophobic, you might not want to do this. And I'm both, but I thought, hey, I'm not going to miss this. So down like Quasimodo, I go into this cell. And there were a number of people on our tour with us, including Brother Carl Burkeen from ACU was with us. And he begins to read. All of us are crowded, hunched down in this little cell where the Apostle Paul allegedly spent his last days and wrote his epistles. And Brother Burkeen begins to read from 2 Timothy 4. I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. The time of my departure has come. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. And by that point, he's choking up and can barely read it. And we're all gulping, thinking about, could this be true? That we're really standing here where Paul wrote his final words. Henceforth there was laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall award me on that day, but not only to me, but to all those who have loved his appearing. Is there a spiritual need this morning that you bring to the family of faith here at West Hill? There are loving shepherds here ready to love on you and pray with you and encourage you. There are members here that would hoist you on their shoulders and prayer before the throne of God. Or perhaps this is the morning. I heard you've had multiple baptisms the last few days or weeks. This is the morning. You want to announce your faith in Christ, be immersed in the watery grave of Christian baptism, raised up to walk in newness of life. Whatever that need might be. Why don't you come right now? Gather we stand and sing.